Irving with Bankers Compliance Consulting. I'm going to give you a high-level breakdown of the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking that FINCEN published on December 21st. What this proposal requires is for banks and MSBs to submit reports, keep certain records, and verify the identity of customers conducting transactions that involve convertible virtual currency or digital assets that have legal tender over a certain dollar threshold. So digital assets that have legal tender are those virtual currencies that can be converted into legal tender, so they have an actual cash value. Why did this proposal come about? Basically, because of the gap between rapidly advancing technology for conducting financial transactions and the bank's ability to detect the bad actors that are taking advantage of these technology advances to launder their ill-gotten funds. In the proposal, it talks about a number of different terms and terminology that is too much detail to get into this high-level explanation, but we'll have an article in an upcoming BCC magazine that gets into a lot more detail and explains and gives definitions for all of this terminology. But what you will hear from the proposal is talk about convertible virtual currency wallets. You'll hear about hosted wallets and unhosted wallets and otherwise covered wallets and counterparties to these convertible virtual currency transactions. So we'll explain all this to you in plain English in our BCC magazine. Breaking down the proposal, the main components are, first of all, that they will include convertible virtual currencies as monetary instruments for purposes of the Bank Secrecy Act. So convertible virtual currency transactions will be pulled under that definition of a monetary instrument. The proposal is establishing new reporting and verification requirements for certain transactions involving these convertible virtual currencies that exceed $10,000 in value. So sounds very similar to CTR reporting. And establish new record keeping and verification requirements for certain transactions involving these convertible virtual currencies that exceed $3,000. So very similar to the requirements for record keeping that we have now for wires and fund transfers. They're very similar to the travel rule. And then lastly, it creates a prohibition on structuring applicable to convertible virtual currencies. So structuring will not just apply to cash activity, but also convertible virtual currencies. These reporting, record keeping, and verification requirements would apply to certain deposits, withdrawals, exchanges, and other payments or transfers involving convertible virtual currency through or to a financial institution that involve unhosted or otherwise covered wallets, and that institution is where these unhosted wallets are is not subject to the Bank Secrecy Act and is located in a jurisdiction that is found on a list that FinCEN will be developing. So for the reporting requirement, very similar to CTR reporting, except it will be its own report. You won't do this on a CTR report. It applies to a single or multiple transactions that in aggregate exceed $10,000 in value of virtual currency, conducted in a 24-hour period. That's a little bit different than a day, because if I conduct a convertible virtual currency transaction covered by this rule at 10 o'clock on Monday, and then I do another one at 9 o'clock on Tuesday, I have two different days, but they're within a 24-hour period. So those transactions would have to be aggregated to see if the value of that convertible virtual currency exceeds $10,000, and you have to file a report. Like the CTR reporting, you have to verify the conductor's identity, and you have 15 days to file the report. You only need to aggregate, by the way, your convertible virtual currency transactions for the purpose of filing this report. You don't have to also aggregate any cash transactions that that same customer conducted in that 24-hour period. That would be aggregated separately for the separate CTR reporting. There are some exemptions similar to CTR exemptions under the proposal that will be extended to convertible virtual currency transactions, but not all of the exemptions would apply. And in fact, FinCEN is requesting comments on whether or not it should apply the exemptions differently than what they have laid out in the proposal. As far as the record keeping goes, there'll be a requirement to obtain and retain certain records of customers conducting convertible virtual currency transactions that exceed $3,000. Not in aggregate. You don't have to aggregate these. If you have a transaction exceeding $3,000, there's record keeping requirements. If it exceeds $10,000, both of these rules apply, the record keeping and the report filing. You have to verify the customer's identity, and then you have to keep an electronic record of certain bits of information. So some little twists there, but very similar to your travel rule and the record keeping requirements for wires and fund transfers. As far as verifying the identity, FinCEN recognizes that these are digital currencies. It's not cash that someone's walking in with and presenting in person, and you can ask them for a driver's license. You're probably not going to be seeing the person or customer that's conducting these virtual currency transactions. So FinCEN said you'll need to establish some risk-based procedures that enable you to form a reasonable belief that you know the true identity of this customer. And since banks are already subject to CIP and ongoing customer due diligence requirements, you can leverage this information that's previously been collected, that you're already obligated to collect. But remember, it's ongoing customer due diligence, so maybe this information is old and you'd want to update it and form that reasonable belief that this is that customer conducting the transaction. And lastly, financial institutions and MSBs, this applies to both, the whole proposal, are required to address the risks associated with convertible virtual currency transactions as part of the BSA AML program. So pull these under your risk assessment. And then you're also required, of course, to report any suspicious activity related to these convertible virtual currency transactions and file a SAR with FinCEN. So a very high-level overview of the proposal. Details will be coming out in an upcoming BCC magazine article. And of course, we will cover this in upcoming webinars and conferences. Thank you and have a great day.